Alright, basic amplifiers, how you can get them to work for you, and basically how they work. So, first commercial amplifier, 1947, and that's a Fender Tweed Pro. But most of these early models really have very little settings. There's only 3 tone dials and possibly, I don't know what that one does, main volume, master volume or something. But they're very simple. Mostly for acoustic amplifiers, not really anything technical that you'd use on most modern day recordings. But basic operation is most amps are made using valves, and there's lots of different names to them, like tubes and stuff. But they're pretty much exactly the same. I mean, a tube amplifier will gain more volume out of lower wattage than a valve would, so you need more valves than tubes. But they're pretty much they're just more powerful versions of the same thing, basically. And how it works is the most important part is that you get a good electrical current flowing into your amplifier. So not loading it into big multi-sockets or anything. It's good to have like a straight power supply from your main thing. And what happens is the electricity from the mains goes through into the amp through some resistors and capacitors. And what happens is these capacitors will split the voltage into different sections of the amplifier, so every part of the amplifier receives the best and optimum amount of power going to it. And first it goes into the preamplifier, which fixes the voltage gain to the input signal. So that's your main piece that's your main signal running through to the amplifier. And then what happens is after this it goes into passive tone controls, which is the main operating dials on the top of your amplifier, which you will get your sound from. Now what happens is after the signal is sent through the tone controls, the signal is then going to be boosted by another active valve preamp. Now because of the signal loss between the passive tone controls and because it goes active, passive, active, so you need to sort of put the power in, the power is lost, the power needs to be put back into it again. So then what happens is signal is then carried through into a master control volume, which controls the volume for all the channels on the amplifiers, and most amplifiers will generally have two channels on it for your distortion and your clean settings. And what happens after this is it's then sent to a phase splitter. Now I think this is the reason, because a lot of amplifiers will have 2 speakers, so phasing in and out, you've got your stereo left and right, they both need to sound not conflicting and going against each other, so the phase splitter is then put into play and then goes through a driver. Now the last stage is known as the power stage of the amplifier, and what happens is it runs into your final set of valves, which will then convert this small piece of signal into a large current voltage. And then what will happen is after this it's then sent to an output transformer, and finally it goes to the speaker. So there's a lot of technical stuff, and this is the inside of a small 15-watt practice amplifier. So you have all your capacitors and resistors in here and valves underneath here. Now this is a pretty old model of a Valvetronics one, because a lot of today's amplifiers you won't generally have the valves sticking out the bottom, they'll be encased in the back of that. But it's hard to find examples of people opening apart their modern day amplifiers because they get quite expensive. And this is a Valvetronics VT100. This is a more modern amplifier, sort of. This is the one I own, and what you got here, you got your main control settings, some dynamic effects on here, but I didn't use them in the samples. And a lot of what you'll find on today's modern amplifiers or in little effects boxes is the ability to switch your amp models. So you're not limited to, say, the basic 1 or 2 channels of clean and distortion. You can have multiple different amp sounds coming out of one amplifier. So basically, I'll play this first sample. This is going to be interesting. Okay, so this is an example of an acoustic. Oh, no, that's the end of it. This is a sample of more acoustic dry signal. Dry mouth now. There's not very much gain in in this setting is mostly based around the middle. I've got the pickup selector in a halfway position, so I'm getting both the bridge and the neck pickup. And the amp model is the Vox's clean setting, so this will be used if you're gonna record an acoustic guitar. It's kind of like the sound you'll be aiming for with an electric signal. So obviously with the miking techniques of acoustic guitars, it's all very different. But if you're just doing it straight out of an amplifier, it's always good to just get a nice mellow sound, something that's not going to really conflict much in your mix, basically. But because of the added bass and the middle pickup, I'd say it was better for a real guitarist to use that setting. Now get to a pop setting. So the difference in this is a lot more treble. Something's really going to cut through your mix on a more popular tune indeed, but a little bit in middle, still not very much gain at all. Because I'm using the bridge pickup instead of the neck pickup, I'm mostly going to be picking up most of the treble on this recording. So it's really something that would be best for a lead player instead of having it as a background piece. Unless you wanted it like that, it's fine. But mostly suited for something that's going to cut through your mix. Have a look at some country. To be fair, I double track this part, so this is using both my neck and my bridge pickup on separate tracks, so it's a bit of a cheat, but the basic sound is you're going to have a lot more middle into this, coupled with a bit more bass, and obviously the gain is going to cut through a lot more, and it's using an old AC30 amp model, so the sound is more of a classic sound, but definitely trying to stick around sort of like the 70s, 80s period with that kind of sound. It's definitely more important if you're going for individual genres. I mean, if you want to make up your own, if you've got your own genre going on, you can just go nuts on a guitar track, but if you're going for a more genre-defined song, then it's definitely worth investing the time and trying to figure out what kind of sounds that other bands at the time used. So have a look at rock and blues, they're sort of the same era, well, came out of each other really.
Will they turn down the audio a bit?
Oh, sure.
I can hear you too clearly when the thing is played.
Hopefully that'll work. Now, in this amp model, I use a previous version of the AC30, which is the AC15. It's a lot smaller, and it's really those kind of amps that used to be used in the day when distortion would have been achieved by simply just turning it up to full and just getting a distorted sound just from the clean channel. So more middle again, a lot more bass, but treble is just eased off a bit, and the gain is obviously a lot more. Yeah, the gain has to be pushed a bit more on these old amps, so a bit more gain on the settings, and it kind of works for both styles. So if you're a lead player or rhythm player, you can sort of get along quite fine with a setting like that. And finally, it's probably the more modern guitar sounds. This one's going to come out loud. This is a more heavy sound, upping the treble, but really low middle and quite high bass as well. And also the gain is turned up significantly, as well as the pre-amp model being a US high gain setting. So this is quite an attack setting. There's no pre-EQ after this. It's just the raw recordings from the amplifier. So they're not really being treated or anything. So you know, you could use this as an example of a good or a bad way to use heavy gain. So it works both ways really, but depending on where you want your record to sound. But best ways to go is to pick a suitable amplifier or amp modeling plugin for your genre of music, as being faithful to what you're trying to create is sometimes can be important. But then again, if that's not something that bothers you, you know, going all out can sometimes produce some very strange and different results. And also spend a lot of time on your amplifier tones, and don't sort of flood your mix with lots of unnecessary settings which you think, oh, I can take that out of the EQ. It's much easier just to spending a lot of time on these settings and just getting them just about to the point where you're happy with them, so then you can edit them in the mix. And also listen and learn from other songs or other bands which you take influence from. It's always the most important thing. Try and spend time maybe recreating sounds which you hear on records. It can be quite useful. I've definitely found it useful throughout my time playing. So yeah, that's my presentation.